On the 4th of October 1967, dozens of people on the eastern coast of Nova Scotia, Canada saw unusual lights in the sky, and several saw a UFO appear to plunge into the ocean. The apparent crash prompted a response from the Canadian and US governments, and triggered a decades-long search for evidence. Sometimes referred to as the Canadian Roswell, the Shag Harbor incident is notable for the abundance of evidence exposing a secret military response, and a subsequent effort to cover it up. There were at least 11 UFO sightings across eastern Canada preceding the famous crash at Shag Harbor. The first occurred on October 3, 1967, when the pilots of a cargo plane over the southwestern coast of the province of Nova Scotia saw a UFO from their cockpit. The rest occurred on the evening of the 4th. Just before 8 p.m. that evening, William T. Bowe and his brother were stargazing on Will's front lawn in a small community just east of Halifax, Nova Scotia, when they saw 3 slow-moving white lights above the cloud line. The first 2 lights were dim, with a brighter white light in the rear. The sighting lasted for 5 minutes, after which the pair promptly reported it. At 10 p.m., 12-year-old Chris Stiles of Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, had a sighting from his bedroom window, which overlooked Halifax Harbor. Through binoculars, Stiles saw a round object lit with a dull orange light flying along the shoreline, so he ran outside to get a closer look. He estimated the light to be 60 feet, or 18 meters in diameter, and could see that it was moving in his direction. Stiles ran home in fear, but the UFO apparently continued along its path, and was soon after observed by Dr. Maurice Coffey from his nearby home. Around the same time, a photographer named Wilfred C. Eisner was burning an old sailboat with 2 of his friends on the beach in Lunenburg, southwest of Halifax. While collecting firewood around 10:30 p.m., Wilfred looked up and noticed 3 motionless lights in the shape of a triangle, 2 amber ones on the bottom and a blue light on top. Will set his camera on a rock to take a long exposure photo, and later determined that the lights remained in the same position for over 15 minutes. Further west, outside the village of Hassett, Ian Andrew, a constable with the National Canadian Police Force, the RCMP, was on a stakeout in the woods with 3 game wardens. Sometime after 11 p.m., the group observed a glowing light slowly drifting across the sky around 200 to 300 feet, or 60 to 90 meters above the tree line. Constable Andrew described its shape as an upside-down candle flame with a surrounding corona, and said that there were sparks shooting out. It made no sound. There were additional UFO sightings southwest of Halifax at roughly 8:30 p.m., south of Sambro around 9 p.m., in Halifax around 10 p.m., and off the southwestern coast of Nova Scotia after 11 p.m. There were also 2 more sightings near Shag Harbor at unknown times, one of which involved a craft shining yellowish flames or lights, and an occupant seen through a window. Most of these accounts went unrecorded until researchers contacted witnesses beginning in the mid-90s. The night of October 4th, 1967, was cool, clear, and moonless. Around 11:20 p.m., 18-year-old fisherman Laurie Wickens was driving himself and 4 other teenagers home on Highway 3, which follows the coast of Nova Scotia. They had just entered Shag Harbor from the east when Wickens noticed a horizontal row of 4 flashing yellowish lights, roughly 60 feet or 18 meters across, flying just 200 feet or 60 meters over the ocean. The teens all watched the lights go out, then each one turned on in sequence until they were all lit up, at which point they switched off again and repeated the pattern. Around the same time as Wickens' sighting, 18-year-old Dave Kendricks was driving his friend, Norm Smith, west on Highway 3, just east of Shag Harbor. Smith noticed a row of 4 evenly spaced flashing reddish-orange lights in the sky ahead, apparently attached to a larger dark object. At moments the lights appeared to be stationary, while at other times they seemed to be moving in a southeasterly direction, descending towards the water. The lights tilted to a 45-degree angle and descended, quickly disappearing behind the tree line. Dave then dropped Norm off at his house and drove home. While Norm was walking to his front door, he saw the bright object approaching the harbor and called for his father, Wilfred. Norm and Wilfred were both concerned that it was an airliner in distress and decided to drive to the shore. Meanwhile, the other teens in the car watched the object slowly approach the ocean, pausing occasionally along the way. Wickens believed he was witnessing a plane crash in progress, so he drove faster and attempted to keep the lights in view. At this point, the row of lights was seen tilting to a 45-degree angle and descending towards the water. Trees blocked the teens' view of the anticipated impact, but Wickens heard a whistling noise followed by a whoosh and a loud bang. He soon arrived at a spot with a clear view of the water, and the teenagers stepped out of the car to see a pale yellow dome of light bobbing above the surface. It was an estimated 600 to 700 feet, or around 200 meters offshore. By this time, all of the witnesses began to doubt it was an airplane crash. Wickens drove to the nearest payphone to notify the RCMP. Around 11:25 p.m., Corporal Victor Werbicki at the Barrington Passage Detachment answered the call and quickly received 3 more calls from locals corroborating Wickens' claims. Werbicki and Constables Ron O'Brien and Ron Pond then went to the scene. Werbicki called the Halifax subdivision of the RCMP to report the events before going to the scene himself, and was later informed that there were no aircraft reported missing at the time. At least a dozen people had gathered on the shore at this time, including Wickens and friends, and more arrived shortly after. All were looking out at the pale yellow light on the water, estimated to be under 1,000 feet, or about 300 meters away, drifting slowly out to sea. It appeared that there was something underneath it, because it was floating at least 8 feet, or nearly 2.5 meters above the surface. Constable Pond was watching the object through binoculars, and felt that it was moving under its own power, leaving a yellow foam behind it. There were at least 16 identified witnesses to the light before it disappeared. Officers learned that some of these witnesses heard a whistling sound and saw a flash of light when the object first approached the water. Officers worked to find boats to mount a rescue, still assuming that they were looking at a plane crash. Norm Smith's uncle, Lawrence, skippered the first of 2 boats sent out to look for wreckage and survivors, and Norm went on the second. Both boats arrived at their destination, only to find a large patch of 3-inch thick glittery yellow foam shining on the water's surface. Those with experience at sea knew that it wasn't regular sea foam. The patch of foam was estimated to be 80 feet, or 25 meters wide, and half a mile, or 800 meters long. Beneath the patch, many air bubbles were rising to the surface, and there was a distinct smell of sulfur in the air. Constable O'Brien watched as a younger man moved his arms through the foam, leaving his skin and clothes covered in an oily substance that could not be identified by anyone on board. The foam also didn't stick to nets or clothing, and dispersed in a short time. By 12:30 a.m., 5 more boats had joined the search, but found no sign of a downed aircraft. At around 3 to 4 a.m., the rescue efforts were paused and resumed a few hours later. The following day, on the 6th, 4 divers from the Royal Canadian Navy's Fleet Diving Unit arrived from Halifax and searched the crash location, finding nothing. However, a local fisherman named Donald Nickerson claimed that he witnessed divers bring up some aluminum-colored debris. 3 additional divers joined the search before it was called off on Sunday, October 8th. The Aerial Phenomena Research Organization, or APRO, a civilian organization for UFO research, also investigated the case and published a report on it. By November 1967, the case had come to the attention of Dr. Edward Condon, who had been tasked with directing the definitive study on UFOs with the University of Colorado Boulder. However, because the case was then dismissed by RCMP and Maritime Command, Condon refused to investigate it any further. The Condon Report, published in 1969, included the Shag Harbor incident, but offered no insights and simply labeled the case as unexplained. After this, the events were largely forgotten. In 1992, the same Chris Stiles who saw the UFO from his bedroom in 1967 watched an episode of Unsolved Mysteries that discussed the alleged crash at Roswell. Recalling his own sighting and the crash at Shag Harbor, Stiles decided to learn more about the case. With help from his friend Bob McDonald, Stiles obtained copies of news articles and began requesting military communications through different government agencies. He found that documents from the Halifax Rescue Coordination Center, or RCC, dated the morning of the 5th, described the object as a UFO. Other documents also referred to the UFO as the dark object, possibly because its structure could not be discerned behind the lights. Official reports did not even attempt to explain what had occurred. In 1993, Stiles tracked down one of the Navy divers and interviewed him. Harry, as he is known, recalled diving off Shelburne Harbor. He recovered debris and large chunks of a foam-like substance that began to decompose as he brought it to the surface. Harry also stated that there were 2 UFOs on the seabed, and that divers witnessed beings underwater. Gradually, Harry became angry and reluctant to share details, claiming that he wanted to avoid any trouble. Later that same year, Jim, a friend of Stiles who worked in the Canadian Air Force, shared that he was stationed on a naval vessel off of Shelburne for a week after the Shag Harbor crash. Jim and the others on his team were instructed to help identify recovered aircraft parts, but no pieces were ever produced. Jim revealed that he was kept below deck and told that they were over a Russian submarine. However, he overheard some of the divers discussing 2 objects that were not any kind of sub, nor anything from this planet. In the spring of 1994, Stiles came into contact with an anonymous witness known as Earl, a former weapons technician with top-secret clearance in the military. In 1970, Earl had his own UFO sighting, and while discussing the event with his commander, Colonel Rushton, he learned that NORAD had tracked the Shag Harbor UFO as it entered the atmosphere over Siberia, crossed Canada, submerged in Nova Scotia, then moved northeast to Shelburne. The submarine detection grid had picked it up, alerting those at Shelburne's then-secret submarine detection base. For 7 days, 6 or 7 naval ships, Canadian and American, investigated the location and sent divers down to observe and photograph the 2 objects. These claims are corroborated by anonymous testimony from a radio officer with the Royal Canadian Air Force, or RCAF, who was on duty during the incident. Leo was limited in what he could disclose, but assured Stiles that, quote, there were 2 objects that went into the water that night, not just one. The divers took all kinds of pictures. In total, Stiles found 4 witnesses who corroborated the presence of Navy vessels. One, known as Terry, was an electronic intelligence officer for the RCAF. On the night of the incident, Terry was ordered to abandon a training exercise to spend 7 days flying along the coast from Maine to Shelburne dropping sonar buoys. Further, Terry's wife had been living in Shelburne at the time and claimed the road to Government Point was blocked by military personnel. One couple who lived in the area had a close encounter that was so traumatic that they flatly refused to speak about it, but a friend of the couple told Stiles that they had encountered 4 or 5 entities. In 1997, Stiles and Ledger managed to track down Barry Crowell, who worked at the Cape Roseway lighthouse overlooking the waters off Government Point in 1967. Crowell and his wife recalled a night in early October when supposed commandos came ashore, clearly ill-prepared, and took over the lighthouse for roughly 3 days in a mock raid exercise. Stiles spoke to a source within the Air Force, who claimed that fighter planes were sent out on the night of the incident to intercept what was suspected to be an inbound missile traveling at an impossible 7,500 miles per hour, or 12,070 kilometers per hour. At one point, The object stopped in place before resuming its path at 4,400 miles per hour, or 7,080 kilometers per hour, then slowed down before reaching Shag Harbor. In autumn of 1994, Stiles reviewed documents contained in the National Archives, Department of National Defense, and Canadian Forces headquarters in Ottawa. The files he was able to obtain appeared culled, and some of the collections even lacked documents Stiles had previously obtained from other sources. In one group of files, a yellow slip of paper indicated that significant deletions had occurred just 3 months before his visit. Stiles also found that Environment Canada's archives were strangely missing all files for October 1967. This wasn't the only evidence of a cover-up. The photocopies of the Coast Guard log that Stiles received had many unusual errors, and it was all written in the same handwriting, meaning one person would have had to have been on duty for 48 hours straight to fill it out. Also, the documents were from a spiral binder, and not part of a bound, numbered volume like every other log. Other logs that were sought out were also missing. Stiles also found evidence that soon after the crash, government officials had disseminated a cover story for the presence of the ships off of Shelburne. On October 12th, the Shelburne Coast Guard ran an article that claimed that a U.S. barge was there for repairs after it somehow took on water, requiring divers to fix the hull. A memo from Halifax's Rescue Coordination Center, dated roughly 36 hours after the incident, revealed that the preliminary investigation conducted by the center ruled out the possibility of an aircraft, flares, floats, or any other known objects. Reports didn't mention any debris recovered. However, a communication document marked Priority noted another UFO sighting the week after the incident, just a few kilometers northwest of Shag Harbor. In 1995, Stiles met writer and MUFON investigator Don Ledger, who decided to help with the investigation. At that time, Stiles was working out how to send divers back into the waters off of Shag Harbor. A survey chart of the location conducted by the Bedford Institute of Oceanography in Halifax in 1998 included handwritten comments by sonar interpreters. At spots where the dark object was suspected of being, the interpreters wrote, "May not be boulders," and "What the hell are these things?" A standout feature in a photograph of the sonar returns shows 4 circular depressions or mounds, roughly 16 feet or 5 meters in diameter, arranged in a diamond pattern. With guidance from experts, Stiles proposed a 3-day dive expedition through the Fund for UFO Research, but his proposal was declined. In July of '95, the crew for the TV show Sightings filmed a segment in Shag Harbor, and the show's executive producer funded the dive shortly after. On September 17, 1995, Stiles and Ledger, the Sightings crew, and 2 technicians from Canadian Seabed Research began a sonar survey of the waters between Shag Harbor and Outer Island. Poor weather conditions prevented them from searching a point of interest identified in the prior survey, further south of Outer Island. The sonar detected a few targets to dive to, but uncovered nothing of note. In 2009, Shag Harbor researcher David Svet organized a dive to investigate the 1988 sonar targets. Despite poor visibility, the divers seemed to find 2 of the 4 depressions which were strangely absent of flora and fauna, and contained pebbles that were distinctly smaller than those from the surrounding area. Another diving expedition conducted in 2018, with Svet and the descendants of oceanographer Jacques Cousteau, didn't uncover anything new. The crash at Shag Harbor made a quick splash in the media. The first paper to report on the incident was the local Shelburne Coast Guard on October 5th, followed by the Halifax Chronicle Herald on the 7th. Chronicle Herald reporter Ray McLeod later claimed that the RCMP was initially totally cooperative with providing information, but then became much more secretive, forcing him to rely on local witnesses. After a week, the local papers dropped mention of the incident, but it was later popularized in publications like Fate magazine, The National Enquirer, and a 1970 comic book. In 2018, the case inspired a story in a Wolverine comic about an alien crash at Shag Harbor. A documentary on the case was released in the year 2000, featuring Stiles and Ledger, as well as witnesses Wickens, Smith, and Eisner. The documentary also included Ray McLeod and Earl, the anonymous former staff member of the Barrington radar station. In the following years, the case was featured in several more documentaries and books. The incident became popular enough to warrant a dedicated museum, a research group, and recurring expos. Stiles and Ledger published a book in 2001 entitled Dark Object. Stiles has since teamed up with journalist and researcher Graham Sims to follow up and expand on the first book, publishing Impact to Contact in 2013. Stiles continues to explore the Shag Harbor case and other sightings in conference presentations and his recent podcast, Forbidden Science. Stiles never settled for any one explanation for the Shag Harbor UFO sightings, but largely rules out the possibility that they were caused by military craft. The fact that the UFO at Shag Harbor apparently moved below the surface of the water makes it one of hundreds of unidentified submerged objects, or USOs, observed around the world. The presence of a foam-like substance also makes it one of several UFO sightings to involve deposited materials that soon vanish. For example, the Condon Report noted several UFO sightings that coincided with the appearance of a stringy, cotton-like substance known as angel hair that tended to disappear in a few hours. The smell of sulfur, which those in the boats reported at the crash site, is also traditionally associated with appearances of demons and the devil. The crash at Shag Harbor was one of many UFO encounters around the world to involve an object that apparently traveled underwater, raising the possibility that other UFOs are capable of doing the same. However, the incident is especially notable for the involved, if secretive, responses from the US and Canadian governments, and for the abundance of evidence attesting to an international cover-up. Perhaps because of this cover-up, we may never know what entered the water that night, or what authorities learned about it in the aftermath. I've decided to stop producing new videos for Think Anomalous. I'll only be making a few more videos, and I'll be doing so at a slower schedule. Thanks to all my subscribers and viewers for your engagement, and for all the wonderful feedback I've received. I'm sorry to disappoint those who hoped that I would get back to producing regular content, but I hope that you continue to enjoy my videos for years to come. Please look out for my forthcoming book on the UFO wave of 1896 and 7, tentatively titled Flights of Fancy. Follow us on X, Facebook, and Instagram for updates. Thanks, everyone. Think Anomalous is created by Jason Charbonneau. Music by Josh Chamberlain. Research and draft script by Clark Murphy. Illustrations by V.R. Lawrence.